Hello, this is Angela with Parker's Permaculture. I'm obviously not at home this morning. I am sitting in my car in North Portland waiting to pick my kid up from an appointment. And I thought, you know what? I have a few moments. Let's take the opportunity and expound upon a short video that I put up this morning. It was originally a TikTok. If you don't follow me over there, please go over there and check out the content that I've been creating. I'm still learning how to use the platform and engage with folks who communicate a little bit differently than I'm used to. Still getting my sea legs a little bit. But I made a stitch with another video about, when folks have guest towels and nice things that they only put out for company. And, in fact, let me just cut it in here real quick in case you haven't seen it.
Can't put on the audio without getting a copyright strike. Basically, they have a guest towel nailed to their wall to keep their kids from using it. And this guy is like, now you're going to have a dirty towel with fingerprints on it nailed to your wall.
Okay, but seriously though, did anybody else grow up in a company-ready house where everything had to be perfectly presentable at all times? Where you as a child were full of anxiety because you were afraid of messing anything up, of leaving fingerprints on anything, and God forbid breaking anything? Where everything had to be immaculate at all times so that you could impress people when they came over. As someone who has inherited those things, we use them. We use the good china, we use the guest towels, we use the good company sheets, we use the crystal. And more than that, I teach my kids that it is okay if those things get worn out or they get broken. It's more important that my kids have a home they feel safe and comfortable in, where they're not walking on eggshells afraid of messing up the nice things. And it's important that those objects get used and enjoyed. Use the good china, y'all. Enjoy it.
So are you somebody that grew up in a company-ready house? For me, on this channel, I talk not only about permaculture design out in the garden, but also the way that we design our lives for sustainability and resilience, right? And part of taking care of a home and living in a home in a way that is sustainable is the habits and routines that we create, and whether keeping traditions alive is something that is serving us, that is really enriching our lives and making our lives more sustainable, making our job as caretakers of a home and a household more sustainable. And I have thought about this topic a great deal, especially as my parents have passed away. And, over the last few months, I have been incorporating their possessions into my household, a percentage of their possessions. Now, as I said in that video, I grew up in a company-ready house. My mother was the consummate homemaker. She not only was an amazing cook, but she kept the house beautiful, beautifully decorated, immaculately clean. And, I don't blame her for that. I don't blame her for the ways that was difficult for me to be a child in that space. She grew up in a house with a mother who was a hoarder. I mean, I thought my grandma was the best thing ever. I loved my grandparents. They were fantastic. I loved visiting them. But my grandma was a hoarder. And, by the end of her life, not even by the end, the last 10 years or so, everything was stacked to the ceilings and there were narrow pathways. And my mom, had that trauma from her childhood of growing up in a household where the expectation was that women would have a presentable home. And yet she didn't feel she could have her friends over without having to do a tremendous amount of cleaning and having conflict with her mom over the state of the house. So I think we can often find some of our habits in adulthood can be taking the pendulum and swinging it the other way from what we experienced when we were growing up. We want a chance to create a life that is different and not repeat the mistakes or the trauma or the stress that we had as kids. And so I think that's what my mother was experiencing. She really wanted her household to be nothing like the one she grew up in. And I find that the pendulum has swung back toward the middle for me. And I'm grateful that she taught me a lot of skills about how to clean, what the expectations were of someone who would have a company-ready house. I'm grateful that I learned those skills. I learned how to clean really well. I learned how to cook really well. I learned how to throw a party really well. I learned how to clean in detail, Do I clean in detail the same way that my mom did? Nope, but I know how to do it and I can do it if I need to. I don't judge my mother, but it was difficult to be a child in that house. In fact, I might cut in a picture here because I still have it. I had a board that was 2 foot by 3 foot, a wooden board, and that was my craft board. And if I wanted to make a mess or do any kind of childlike play or activity, it had to be confined to that board. I could not let my mess extend beyond that space. And if I made a mess, it was kind of the end of the world, right? If I spilled something or if I broke something, it was like it was devastating. It was like I committed the ultimate sin. And to clarify, my mom was not like that as a grandmother. So my kids didn't experience that at all. But as a child, it was very much like that. And so I became really full of anxiety. I was afraid to touch anything. I was afraid to break anything. If I leaned on the wall to like fix the heel on my shoe, then I would get chastised for potentially leaving fingerprints on the wall. And then I'd have to clean the wall, right? I felt as a child like my house was a place where I was a guest and I couldn't really live there and I couldn't make a mess there. I couldn't be a child there. And I came to fear my own behaviors and have shame over my own very normal childlike behaviors. And I know that my mother did not intend that at all, but that was the consequence of living in a house where you're told you can always tell how clean somebody's house is by looking at the baseboards. And you have to leave a room cleaner than you found it. When you're 6, it's really hard to leave a room always cleaner than you found it. Always feeling like all of my mother's possessions were more precious to her than I was. Because if I got hurt, it was suck it up, buttercup. But if something that she owned got damaged or broken or something spilled on it, it was the end of the world, right? And that comparison really stood out for me, right? And so for me as a parent, I'm sorry, the light is really weird. I'm sitting under trees, y'all, and it's autumn. For me as a parent, I want to do differently. For me as a homemaker, I want to do differently. One of the things I think is so crucial is that we make our homes a place that are a safe haven. We make our homes a place where we can feel relaxed and we can fully be who we are. That includes everybody in my household, including my children. I don't want them to feel that who they are and what mistakes they might make or what accidents they might have or what normal childlike behaviors they might exhibit are a problem. I don't want my children to feel like the possessions in our house matter more than them. When my kids break something, if they spill something, if they drop something, if they make a mess, I always try and say, that's okay. This is not a huge deal. Let's clean it up. If they break a dish in particular, I'm like, you know what? No big deal. We got it at the thrift store. You know what? We can go buy another bowl. It's okay. Not the end of the world. You broke that mug. I know that mug was special to you, but we can replace it. For me, that is so much a huge part of sustainable parenting, but also a huge part of sustainability for me as a homemaker. I want to make sure that the way I am expecting that I will take care of the house is, while not up to my mother's museum-like standards, is sustainable for me. That I can have a home where I feel comfortable making messes myself. That I can have a home where my kids feel comfortable making messes. That we can clean up afterward. That if the house is untidy, that is okay if we are engaged in more important things like connecting with each other or resting or engaging in hobbies and crafts or working on something else. That there is grace and forgiveness for me and I don't have to have shame and judgment if my house is not company ready all the time or most of the time. That there's nothing wrong with having a house that looks lived in and having a house that is friendly and accepting of children and their behavior. Do I expect my kids to help clean up after themselves? Yes. Do I expect them to treat our possessions with respect? Yes. But at the same time, I am going to let them use the good china. I'm going to let them put apple cider, sparkling apple cider in a champagne flute. And if it gets broken, that is okay. They will have been able to use and enjoy that object rather than see it up on a high shelf, blaring out the message to them that you are not worthy of using this thing and enjoying this thing. When my kids were little, we had tea parties every week. All 4 of my kids, both my girls and my boys. And they got to use real breakable teacups and my favorite teapot. And they got a chance to experience that. And guess what? Some teacups got broken over the years. It's not the end of the world. It was much more important for my kids to have created those memories and that connection and the opportunity to experience playing at adulthood, the opportunity to have tea with mom and siblings every week. That was so much more important than keeping physical objects immaculate, right? So I realized that like this may seem a tiny bit off topic. And while it may overlap with my normal Housewife Friday segments, I also think it really overlaps with permaculture in general. The way that we treat each other, the way that we prioritize people care over material possessions, the way that we prioritize relationships over stuff, the way that we give ourselves a measure of grace in the standard that we expect in our household, and the amount of housekeeping that we do, the fact that we reserve judgment when we look at the state of somebody else's household, and that we extend grace and forgiveness to ourselves when we don't always meet our ideals. That is all permaculture. That is all the second ethic of permaculture, people care. And I would also argue that it is the third ethic of permaculture, fair share. Because we are making sure that we are expending a fair share of our energy on the caring of people and relationships instead of the caring of stuff, right? Where am I putting my fair share of energy? Is it into having a house that looks amazing all of the time so that if strangers come over, that I don't feel judged and shamed by them or I get their approval? Or am I putting my fair share of energy into the important relationships in my life, into my garden, into my hobbies, into learning how to have balance? So I don't know if you have thoughts about that. I would love to hear them. It is about time for me to go pick up Ruth, and I will be back next time with a regular permaculture video. Yesterday, I spent more than 6 hours outside working in the yard and kind of messed up my back a little bit because I'm old and maybe I should be more gentle with myself. But I have some of that content coming out later this week. So please don't forget to click like and subscribe, and I'll be back real soon. Bye-bye.